welcome everyone to the first of these recordings that Matt and I are going to do around Matt's exploration of our family's genealogical history. So, more than anyone I know, Matt has become quite the expert on the Zager, Glantz, and beyond. Really looking forward to hearing Matt get into the weeds on his process, where he got this interest from, and how he does all this exploration. So, thanks for joining me today, Matt.
It's my pleasure to be here. I'm really excited.
What is genealogy? What does it mean to you? And why are you so interested in the history of our family?
I think genealogy is really just like someone's family tree, like who their parents are and their parents' parents and so on, and like who are their relatives. But I think it means a little bit different, like things to like different people of like what they mean by that. Genealogy, I think it comes from the word like genes. What are you made of? So some people, it's a lot more of like the DNA, while other people, it's more of like a story. And I think that's for me is really trying to build a story. Like I think that if you were to rank who has the best tree, are you looking at who can go back the furthest, all the way to Adam and Eve, or which there are people who claim to do, which is like ridiculous, but
We'll get into
um
that in a future episode.
or who has the most relatives, maybe not back as far, but they have a bajillion cousins. But for me, I think it's which tree tells the best story. Like it's one thing to have a name and a date on the thing, but to have pictures, or I love newspaper articles where I find like these ridiculous stories. This relative was almost swept away in a flood, which I have found. Um, and like interesting things that are just like, wow, this adds so much context. Or like having a picture to be like, this is what they look like. I think that someone who can really like whose tree tells like the complete story, especially with Jewish history. When you go back, there's so many gaps now that I think that it's really fascinating to try to fill in.
Yeah, one of the reasons that I'm so excited to dive into this with you is because I have such a love of history, as I know you do, and
Mhm.
together I think we can bridge the family history of which you're such an expert on with our combined historical knowledge, which together I think we have a pretty good base for it. Bring those together and tell a really compelling story, like you mentioned, is the whole point of this. I'm very glad that your ambition is not to just get as many names as possible, but to tell an exciting and interesting story. And I think that will make this really fun for everybody. I would love to hear what first got you interested in genealogy. Was it an experience you had when you were younger? I know I always remember seeing at family reunions those big rippling family trees and thinking, wow, that we have a lot of relatives and we always grew up with so many relatives. So connecting the dots on who's our first cousin, second cousin, is we just call our cousin, but we don't really know how we're related,
Mhm.
was always a challenge in a lot of ways, especially when I was very young. So take it away on how you got into all this.
Yeah, so I mean, I think as long as I've been alive, I've had some level of like interest. Like I was always like fascinated by hearing stories from like our grandparents about their family and them growing up, and seeing old photos was so cool to me. And like yeah, all these relatives, like whoa, like the family tree, like family reunion. I'm like, wow, like this is how we're related to the Goldbergs. Like like when I was younger, you just kind of take it for granted that oh, these are our cousins. Like even people like second cousins that I didn't realize when I was little how we were related. I was just told we were and just kind of accepted it. Um, as I got older, it definitely became a little more curious. What really like set me off was when over COVID, you had the brilliant idea of oh, let's all do a presentation, and our mom decided to do hers on her grandpa Hal or her father's family from Hungary. And I think it was really fascinating because even when she was going over his his family, like, oh, his mother's name Anna Wojcicki. I'd never heard the name Wojcicki. I was what, like 19 years old or something, and I didn't know her grandpa's mother's name was, and I realized I knew a lot less about the family than I thought. And I was really interested, especially because she went over a lot of like them in Hungary. And for me, while I'd certainly known a little bit, I think a lot of the way the family like story has been presented to me was always they arrived here on a boat from Europe, and that was the start. Like the start of the Rippling family tree was from Hyman Rippling and Edith Coons, who were both the immigrant. Like it was, they were generation zero. Even that's how um, they are generation 0 or 1, where you want to call it, but like that's how they're labeled on the tree. So that was like, oh, they're the start. I never really thought about the idea that like, oh, what if you could go back further? To me, I think I just kind of accepted that, oh, there's nothing there. And I think there's also all the misconceptions of like, oh, you can't trace your family, especially in like some like, oh, the records were destroyed or there's nothing left, or even just like, how are you gonna do it? And it wasn't really till I like started to do the research that I realized how much there really is out there, even if it takes a little bit of digging. And yeah, once you get started, it's really hard to stop because it's addicting.
Yeah, a quick note on that presentation from our mom, Miriam. This is her first ever PowerPoint, so it is very fun to go through. There's a lot of content in there, and we'll link to that somewhere so whoever's watching this can see that PowerPoint and get a preview of what this whole series is going to be about. And so, what once you got interested in exploring all of this genealogy stuff and family history, how did you first get started? Were there websites you were using? Were you digging through old photo books? What's your process been, and how did that start, especially?
So the way I definitely started wasn't how, if I had to go back now knowing a lot more, how I'd start now. Because I think I didn't expect that I was going to be doing as much, or I kind of had a basic tree and I would fill it out a lot. And I think I figured like when I started, oh, like our dad's side, they came over to the US earlier. There's gonna be like there's more on them. Like it was a lot easier to find their like big families in the US. So I was able to find a lot more easily. But I was like pretty much exclusively looking at like US records, like censuses and some graves, to build out a tree. And then yeah, some newspaper things, but it wasn't until later that I realized like how useful newspapers could be. But then once I really started to understand that like I'm gonna have to start looking at like other records, like not from the US back further. Um, there's a really good website called Family Search, which is if there's one thing the Mormons have done for us, it's great, is that they started the whole genealogy craze and kind of went all over the world collecting records and like microfilming them or microfiche. And for a long time they were stored in Salt Lake City in this big underground like vault to like preserve them because genealogy is like a religious passion. But then in recent years they like have digitized all of them, like an absurd amount of records, and there's still a lot of records out there that they haven't collected, or that people haven't um digitized. But what they have, it's like on their website and it's free, which is something that's like um Ancestry, My Heritage, those you got to pay for, but Family Search for your website, and the amount of stuff that I found on there is absurd. Like not all of it is indexed, so it's not all you can just search for a name and find someone, which is really nice. Sometimes you need to know where someone came from, but if you can narrow down to okay, they have the town records for the town of Tisabo in Hungary, and the Jewish uh, birth records for this year's. I'm gonna look through those to find their relatives. Um, and there's a lot there, but it's also there's not like one method for every like that. Like there's not one foolproof method for I'm gonna research these people or these people. This is what you have to do. There's a little bit, there's some differences for like different branches, largely depending on where they came from and also what time period you're researching. So like I separate all my research, like in I have like a folder with uh, like all the different documents I've found, and I have I believe 17 like different surnames that are their own folders, but then inside each of those there's more, which it's pretty much every second great grandparent gets their own folder except for um our Kresha Cashman or Lekigmacher is our second great grandma who I have like still have not found like almost anything on yet. Um, which might change if I can get her death record. But and then there's two on like our grandma Joanne's side, two third great grandparents that there's all extensive enough information where they also got their own folders. And then in each folder, it might be like, all right, this is the surname, like in the furthest back relative that I have, it's like say like the Ben family, and then in each side, say the one like or the furthest back that there's like extensive information on, like our third great grandfather Beryl and his wife like Golda. So there the folder is Ben, but then in each side there's a folder for each of their children so that each of those family gets their own folder just so it stays organized. So it you kind of which like really helps me also focus in on um this is who I'm researching. Though it can become hard because something I've learned is that there's a lot of crossover where certain family people are related in multiple ways. So I'm kind of it's not a foolproof method, but that's definitely helps.
What was your biggest surprise in all this research so far?
Where our family is from. It's not like as straightforward. Like you realize, like, oh, like the borders change. But when I realized, like, oh, our grandfather's family's from Hungary, but I've had to do for Hungarian research. I've had to go through records in not only Hungary but Slovakia, Ukraine, Austria, and even like Romania as well. Just like how much like so people did move around a lot, but also the borders moved around. Um, and I think that that was a big surprise. But also just like how much there is out there that you would never expect. Um, or just like wouldn't think that fine. But I'll definitely give a good example of like something that I don't know. I'll say that like I honestly don't know if I expected to find it because I was because it was almost from a family story, and I thought that oh, then it probably isn't true, but it turned out to be. Which was that our fourth great grandfather. There's a photo of him that on the back with is uh it was given to either Grandpa Hal or his parents. That's like oh, you're like great grandfather, 106 years old, and I was like oh, 106, no way. But then looking through records, I like this was one of those examples of I couldn't just search his name and find that. I had to like look through the records and I find the a record and I'm like looking and find the name like death record and I'm like, it says 106 years old. And I'm like, wow, like that that is like that's crazy to think
What
that
other unbelievable stories have we been told that were always thought to be somewhat fictitious, but are in fact
I'm
true?
still looking for Percy Leroy Schwartz, but we'll see if I
Nowhere in the records yet.
no.
All right, I'm going to share this image now, and you're going to tell me who this person is.
All right. Well, it's a little blurry on here. When I sent it, it looks better on mine, but yeah, this is who I was talking about, our fourth great grandfather, Abraham Wojtycki. I've sometimes seen his name listed as Lipot, though I'm fairly certain that Abraham was it's more common. Um, he was, yeah, he died in 1914 in Tisabo, Hungary. It's kind of in central Hungary. Um, but I believe he came originally from like Galicia, like Galicia, which was a lot more like of a Polish influence, hence the name like Wojtycki.
Yep,
Uh,
Galicia was the
yeah,
southern part of southern Poland.
which at the time when he was young, he like that was controlled by Hungary, or like Austro-Hungary, or at least part of it. Um, which a lot of this is like speculation on his origins, but this like it matches up based on like family stories that like unless they're our great grandmother matching with what I've heard from like distant relatives who had similar stories about the family originating in Poland or in Galicia. But yeah, it's I've had no success tracing past him, but he has a really fascinating story, and I found so many interesting things about their family. So yeah, I'm excited to share more about it in the future. But it's
I'm
really
looking
cool.
forward to it as well.
Yeah, it's so cool though to have a photo of like a relative who was born in 1808. Like
Yeah.
Abraham Lincoln wasn't born until 1809. So
Wow.
like that's
It's a great
crazy.
fact.
Yeah, don't fact check me on that one, but
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure.
Listeners at home, do a
Yeah.
quick search. All right. So we could keep going all day on this, but to keep this first episode somewhat brief, do you have any last thoughts, any ideas you want to share before we close this out?
I just want to say like I'm really excited. There's a lot of information. I'm hoping that even just having to go through and present it helps me to maybe figure out some things that maybe had trouble with. I'm gonna try to break it up based on branches of the family that I don't know specifically how much I'll break it up or I'll do, but in ways that make sense based on location and branch. There's definitely a lot of information. Some branches might get multiple videos, or if I find something new, maybe we'll make more episodes about it.
We're also happy to field questions from the audience. Or even it would also be cool to have a guest come on.
Oh yeah, or a relative, or grandparent, someone who wants to talk about memories of things,
Yeah, so any grandmas or grandpas or
or
pop pops or GGs who want to come
great
on the
great aunts, great
yeah.
uncles,
Yeah,
or
we'd love to have anyone
or
with questions or with stories to come on this
Mhm.
show with us.
Yeah. And if you have any photos of relatives, send them to me. That's a big thing that I want to start collecting photos of people, because I've been amazed just realizing like how many photos we have of people, and finding that there are certain people that have some of those same photos, but then they have all of these other photos of, like their family. And I'm like, man, like if I start reaching out to people, get like a huge collection of photos of their family.
All right. This is a really fun first episode. Thank you for joining me, Matt. We'll do plenty more of these. By the end of this, we'll be able to trace our family back to Adam and Eve, or at least Homo erectus.
Yeah, back to a amoeba.
All right. Thanks, Matt.
You'll see how distantly related we are with Cody.